right. Let's see who comes in. Hello, everyone. It's time for another of these fantastic Instagram lives. I am, of course, as most of you know, Dr. Matt Dorsey. I am the Chief Scientific Officer for CHOC. Today we're going to be talking about carbohydrates and why they're not the devil. Yeah. Again, just to reintroduce myself, I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I'm a nutritionist, old school supplements nerd. I'm the formulator for CHOC, and also they call me the Chief Scientific Officer, which means that basically I answer all the technical questions and do the research and the sourcing and all that sort of stuff. So, this is a topic I think that requires a lot of discussion, a whole lot, because people have been horribly misled about the nature of carbohydrates. Hey there, Janelle Malouf. Don't think I pronounced your name correctly. Good to see you too. I'm doing well. So I'm curious, before I launch into this, how many of you guys think that low carbohydrate is a good thing? How many of you guys are afraid of carbohydrates like fruit and other natural carbs? I actually am drinking, just to prove a point, you can't see it, but this is actually grape juice. I'm drinking grape juice right now. This is something that too many people have been misled about. And I have a little bit of a criticism, I would say, of the paleo belief system. I call it the paleo religion. Not to pick on just the paleo people, because, you know, there's other groups. There's the plant-based people. They get certain things wrong, although I think they get a lot right, personally. But I'll tell you about what paleo does correctly. Paleo does certain things really, really well. The paleo belief system, it has a lot to do with advocating whole foods, right? Which is a really, really good thing, right? Whole foods, very, very important, right? We want to eat, obviously, everybody wants to eat whole foods, natural foods, get the chemicals out, all the junk, all the garbage. You know, paleo also believes in, a lot of other cool stuff that has something to do with food, like, just simple stuff like exercise and sunlight, and just returning to a more natural, slightly more natural way of being in the world that is more in line with our genetics and how we evolved on the planet. And that all makes total sense, right? But here's the problem. They have demonized carbohydrates, and they have said, a lot of people in this belief system believe that carbohydrates are inherently bad for your blood sugar. And they tend to, you'll look around, you'll see a lot of videos, you'll tend to find a lot of people making videos saying that, they'll be like, they'll hold up a bag of sugar right here, and they'll hold up like, a banana right here, and they'll say, oh yeah, just as bad, same thing. Absolutely not. That is garbage. So here's the deal. I'm going to first talk about things like somebody just mentioned keto, right? Talk about the super low. So keto is ultra low carb, right? And then there's just general low carb where you're not actually in ketosis, which is what's advocated by a lot of the paleo folks, right? So when you do that, you will actually lower your blood sugar, of course, because if there's no carbs coming in, that will tend to lower your blood sugar. Absolutely, right? And that's what some people call flatlining your blood sugar levels, right? So if your blood sugar is really high, and then all of a sudden you do a low carb diet, it will come down. If there's no carbs coming in, there's not going to be a whole lot of carbs in your blood, right? Now, here's the problem though. The idea that carbohydrates are the only thing to blame for high blood sugar is completely false scientifically. I'll say that one more time. This oversimplified idea that carbohydrates are the only thing that can make your blood sugar higher, that is false. In fact, protein and fat have their own effects on blood sugar. Specifically fat, especially saturated fats, tend to have a negative effect on your insulin function. And just as a quick review, so for all of those who, sure a lot of you guys know what insulin does, but for some of you guys who maybe have forgotten or maybe just don't know what insulin does, right? Here's your cell, right? And then you have a bunch of blood floating around, or a bunch of blood right here outside the cell, and then you have a whole bunch of glucose, sugar floating around the blood. You need to get that glucose into the cell so it can be converted to ATP. energy, right? So there's nothing wrong with glucose. It just needs to get in the cell, not too much built up outside of it, right? Once it gets in the cell, it gets converted to ATP. Yes, absolutely, this live will be saved, 100%. So insulin is the molecule, right, secreted by your pancreas, and it floats around, and when it hits the cell, it tells the cell to open up to get the sugar, the glucose, out of the blood into the cell, where it can then be converted to energy. So guess what disrupts insulin the most? A high-fat diet. Yes, that's right. So I tell all my clients, this is a speech I have practically memorized because I've said it hundreds and hundreds of times to different clients and also friends and family, everybody, right? So in the world of research, unfortunately, they have to figure out ways to give rats, mice, different kinds of diseases in order to study it. Very, very not cool to the mice. That's a whole other topic, right? And so, for example, with respect to like Parkinson's, they'll give them some kind of molecule that simulates Parkinson's in their brain, basically, that destroys certain kinds of dopaminergic neurons and simulates Parkinson's. The drug is called MPTP, right? Guess how they reliably give rats diabetes? This is very, very important. They have figured out, researchers have figured out a way to induce diabetes in rats very, very consistently. Guess how they do it? They don't just feed them tons of carbs. Sure, they do give them plenty of carbs. They also give them a lot of fat, because fat interferes with carbohydrate utilization at the cellular level. I'll say that even a couple more times. Fat interferes with carbohydrate utilization at the cellular level, right? So it interferes with the cell, right? Again, remember, here's your cell, right? Got your glucose out here floating around in the blood. It's got to get into that cell, right? So if insulin is not functioning to tell the cell to open up, then it's going to build up. Glucose will build up outside the cell. Fat, a high-fat diet, saturated fats, animal fats tend to be worse with this in general. This can happen with all different kinds of fats. What happens is you get the accumulation of what's called intramyocellular lipid, abbreviated IMCL. Intramyocellular lipid. Intra, inside of, myo, muscle, because a lot of this is happening in the muscle. Cellular, lipid, fat, right? Intramyocellular lipid. So you have accumulation of fat inside of the cell. That accumulation interferes with the mechanism that transports the glucose from outside the cell to inside the cell, where it can be converted to ATP or energy. So when you do a keto type diet, here's what actually is happening inside your body. Your blood sugar goes down because there's hardly any carbs coming in, right? So that makes sense, right? If you don't have carbs coming in, then of course your blood sugar will go down. So you're going to think when you measure your blood sugar that it's getting better, right? You're going to think it's actually improving. And in a sense it is. But your actual carbohydrate tolerance is going down significantly. So what do I mean by that? So there are a few different ways to measure blood sugar, and it's important to know the differences between them. So you can measure someone's fasting glucose, right? Where you have them not eat, and then you just measure how much sugar is in their blood, how much glucose is in the blood. That's very, very common, right? Part of standard lab work. Number two is called hemoglobin A1C. That is basically a measure. It's like a 2 to 3 month average of your blood sugar over the last, several weeks, right? 2 to 3 months, right? So that gives you an average. This third way is completely different, and it's very important to understand why it's different. This third way, which is relatively uncommon, but still done sometimes, and it's done more for pregnant women, is called an oral glucose tolerance test, OGTT. Oral glucose tolerance test. Now, what does that mean? This is completely different because it actually challenges your body with glucose. This is a challenge test. The first two tests are passive. All they're trying to see is how much sugar is in your blood, right? Very, very passive test. Again, if you're on a low carb, high fat type diet, then yes, of course, that passive test you're going to do fine with, right? Because you don't have any carbs coming in hardly, right? But this oral glucose tolerance test, this is an actual challenge. And what they do is they make you chug, it's kind of gross, they make you chug a whole bunch of straight glucose. Like 100 grams, just drink it, right? Liquid sugar. And then they test to see how fast your cells can pull all of that glucose out of the blood and convert it, right, and get it out of the blood. So they're testing, they're giving you a standardized amount, 100 grams or whatever amount of pure glucose, and then they're testing you after a little while to see how quickly your body can actually use that glucose and get it out of the blood. So what that is actually testing is, that's really testing your actual insulin function. How well insulin can basically hit the cell, tell the cell to open up so it can get the glucose out of there, right? That's what they're actually testing. Now, there is plenty of research out there showing that people who are on a low-carb diet, who are on a keto-type diet, when you give them those first two tests that are just passively checking for your blood sugar, they do fine. When you give them this third kind of test, the oral glucose tolerance test, OGTT, they will fail it miserably. And I'll repeat that one more time. Somebody who has been on one of these trendy low-carb type diets, whenever they are given an oral glucose tolerance test that actually challenges their body with glucose to see how quickly they can get it out of the blood into the cell, they will tend to fail those tests versus someone who eats a more balanced diet, right? This is a demonstration of that principle, right? That this fat accumulates from a high-fat diet. Fat accumulates, intramyocellular lipid, also called ectopic fat, accumulates inside the cell and interferes with the cell's ability to actually use glucose. So what you're doing when you're doing a keto or a high-fat, low-carb type diet, what you're actually doing is you're abolishing your carbohydrate tolerance. You formerly, had a normal carbohydrate tolerance, potentially, right? And you can actually induce a state of prediabetes or diabetes using a low-carb diet. Now, it's not technically diabetes if your blood sugar is actually low because there's no carbs coming in. But what will happen is once you actually, if let's say you're on keto for a long time and then you tend to go toward a more normal diet, what will happen is then all of a sudden your blood sugar will spike, right? So you're on keto for let's say a year, right? 2 years, and you've been eating lots and lots of meat and cheese and oil and God knows what on your keto diet, and your blood sugar's gone down and you're like, this is great, right? And your doctor's like, wow, it's so great, your blood sugar went down. And then you decide to go on a normal diet again and you start eating your apples, and your bananas and grape juice like I'm drinking right now. And so at that point, you're going to have an abnormally high, intense reaction to a normal amount of carbohydrates because you've lost your tolerance to carbohydrates. You can't tolerate carbohydrates anymore, right? Now, this can wear off over time, but you have to take your fats down so your cell can clear that out. And then you also need to take different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, things like that in order to get your metabolism working properly again. So what these trendy, high-fat, low-carb type diets like paleo and keto and all this, what they tend to do is they tend to actually cause a hidden metabolic disturbance, in the form of impaired glucose tolerance. Yes, impaired glucose tolerance. Now, case in point, for those of you guys who don't know, there's this great program called Mastering Diabetes. It's run by a guy named Cyrus Khambatta, PhD, has a PhD in nutritional biochemistry. He himself is actually a type 1 diabetic, and type 1, by the way, is one where you can't produce insulin. Your insulin-producing cells have been destroyed by an autoimmune process or potentially a viral process, according to medical medium. And at that point, you have to inject insulin. Anyway, so the guy who runs this program, Mastering Diabetes, he basically, himself has type 1 diabetes, which is unfortunately incurable, supposedly. Maybe that's not true, and he figured out that actually it's a low-fat, high-carbohydrate, natural carbohydrate though, meaning fruits and vegetables, natural carbohydrate, low-fat diet that can actually cause the best insulin function, the best carbohydrate tolerance, right? So they have this whole program where, and I'm not endorsing them, we're not, Chalk and I are in no way affiliated with Mastering Diabetes. I'm just saying on a scientific level, their program is living proof and it's highly effective. And when I consult with clients personally, if someone has blood sugar issues, I don't actually reduce their carbs. I get them on high quality carbs, of course. I get them off of all the junk, table sugar and soda, of course, no high fructose corn syrup, any of that stuff. But they need plenty of this. Very, very, very important. Actual fruits and vegetables are essential. And people are terrified of fruit. For those of you guys who don't know medical medium, or maybe you do, he calls it fruit fear. There's a lot of fruit fear. I've had so many clients, nutritional coaching clients, where they come to me and they're like, my doctor told me I can't eat apples, I can't eat bananas, or I can only eat a half a banana a day. And I'm like, wow, that's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Meanwhile, the doctor's like, oh yeah, go ahead and keep eating gluten, keep eating dairy, it's fine, keep eating lots of butter. And yet this is not okay. And that is absolutely insane. That is completely crazy. So yeah. And again, of course, like I was saying, there is a difference between good and bad carbs quality. Yes, of course. Like, again, you don't want high fructose corn syrup. You don't want a bunch of table sugar, any of that. But to be afraid of fruit is completely crazy. And it is scientifically specious, this idea that it's just the carbs' fault for high blood sugar. So we have basically thrown out carbohydrates completely. And what is the end result of this? Well, the end result of this is that this is really important for you guys to know, this is fueling the infertility crisis. This is another thing that's responsible for lack of fertility, especially true primarily in women. I also learned this from Anthony William as well. So how does that work? Well, female reproductive system is highly carbohydrate dependent. It needs carbohydrates to function correctly. So I'll repeat that. The female endocrine system, reproductive system, hormones, reproductive system, needs carbohydrate to function. When the carbs go too low, that actually impairs female fertility. Yes, very, very, very true. So if you know a woman who's trying to get pregnant, tell her to do her own research on this and to talk to her practitioners about this and make sure that her practitioners are aware of this connection between female fertility and carbohydrates. Very, very, very important. Yes. So again, at Chalk, we talk a lot about the xenoestrogens, all of the junk that's floating around the environment, all the stuff that we're, inadvertently drinking because we're not filtering it properly, that's messing up our fertility, messing up our vitality, our hormones, right? All these fake chemicals in the plastics that are binding to estrogen receptors and dysregulating our hormones and inducing a state of infertility, right? And is this on purpose? Is it not on purpose? I'll let Shane and the other people talk about that. That's not, I stick as much as I can with the science. Maybe it is on purpose, maybe it's not. You guys probably think mostly it is, but again, I'm just sticking with the science. We know that there's a massive fertility crisis. We know that, both men and women, our hormones are all out of whack. And that's why Chalk, that's why we are so stoked about giving you solutions for fertility, like with Tomcat and Daily for Men and Shilajit, and even Apex glutathione when that comes back out. Glutathione, very, very essential for inflammation, and then that also, and antioxidant support, which also then relates to hormone support indirectly as well. So low carb is a nightmare for women, and you'll notice that most of the people, of the pundits who are really all about low carb, they tend to be male, right? And low carb, men do better with low carb. I'll say that a lot of my clients are women who I do nutritional coaching with. A lot of my clients are women, and they have been usually told by their male doctor or male nutritionist, that keto is a good thing. And I can't tell you how many clients I've rescued from keto or from just general low carb, even if it's not full on keto. And again, just to be totally balanced, yes, you can lose weight on keto. You absolutely can. I've seen people lose huge amounts of weight on keto. That's not debatable, right? You definitely can. But is it a healthy way to lose weight? I personally, several years ago, whenever I got off of a paleo type of diet and then went highly plant-based and then started eating lots and lots of carbohydrates and took my fat levels down, I lost 45 pounds. I think right closer to 45 or 50 pounds easily on a high carb diet. And when I say high carb, I literally mean pretty high carb. I'm talking about I eat 3 bananas a day, tons and tons of berries, crazy amounts of carbohydrates. At least, back then I was especially. So, and again, not giving medical advice, not telling anybody that this is what you should or shouldn't do, but I'm just saying on a scientific level, this idea that you have to get your carbohydrate intake down to fix your blood sugar is absolute garbage. I just want to say that one more time. This oversimplification that is scientifically specious that you need to lower your carbs, your carb intake, in order to lower your blood sugar. And that's the only way. And it's just as simple as carbs in, blood sugar down. That is a garbage idea, and it's completely wrong. The reality to it is that, yes, if you do take the carbs down that are coming in, then yes, your blood sugar will go down, of course. Especially if you take them way, way down. But at a certain point, it's going to catch up with you. You're going to get ectopic fat or intramyocellular lipid accumulation inside the cell. That's going to interfere with your insulin function. It's going to destroy your carbohydrate tolerance. And then when you do have carbs, your blood sugar will spike quite a bit. So, and I'm telling you this just because I from personal experience, from coaching lots and lots of people, and also from my own experience, So one time I was working at an integrated pharmacy a few years ago, and we had a hemoglobin A1C machine, just this little portable machine. And so again, A1C, hemoglobin A1C is a measure of approximately the last 2 to 3 months average of your blood sugar. And at the time I was on a plant-based, high carbohydrate, relatively low to moderate fat diet. And I hadn't measured my blood sugar at all, And then there was a lady there, and she was on a paleo type diet, right? Fairly low carb, higher fat, obviously. And again, this isn't a perfect scientific study, just an anecdote. But here's what happened. I was a little nervous because I was like, all right, well, I'm about to take my blood sugar. I hope that the theory that I'm ascribing to is correct, right? And lo and behold, my A1C was way lower than hers. Mine was like 4.7, relatively good reading. Hers was like 5.4, something like that. Hers was, which is significantly higher, basically, right? So even though I was eating way more carbs and she was eating fewer carbs, because I was on a lower fat intake diet, and because she was eating a lot of animal fats, her blood sugar was actually higher than mine because her insulin function was perturbed by the imbalance in her diet of having excessive amounts of fat. So again, and people are talking about different kinds of fats. I will say, and again, I'm not taking sides saying that everyone should eat meat or everyone should not eat meat. I will say that the plant-based diet has a huge advantage because the animal fats and the saturated fats tends to be worse when it comes to this issue with accumulation of fat inside the cell interfering with insulin function and with glucose tolerance. So that's a really big one. Now, another important thing to know is mitochondrial function. So one of the reasons that Shilajit is excellent for healthy blood sugar levels is because it helps with the mitochondria. Anything that helps with the mitochondria will tend to oftentimes also help with healthy blood sugar levels, supporting healthy blood sugar levels. Because ultimately, all that glucose, again, here's your cell, here's the glucose in the blood, has to go into the cell, right? Once it gets into the cell, though, it's got to go through a bunch of different transformations. It has to, first go through glycolysis, then it has to go through, Krebs cycle, then the electron transport chain. So there's all these different steps it has to go through biochemically to go from glucose to pyruvate to all these different intermediates and eventually to become ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which, as I'm sure you guys have maybe heard, is the energy currency of the cell. So any calorie you eat, whether it's fat, protein, carbohydrate, eventually has to become ATP. So nutrients that are in Shilajit, also some of the stuff that we have in Action 2.0, for example, the Elevate TP in there, as well as rhodiola. A lot of these adaptogens, they tend to oftentimes will support healthy mitochondrial function. And anything that supports healthy mitochondrial function can, to some extent, also help with insulin function. Because again, that glucose has to be transformed into ATP, and that a lot of that is happening in the mitochondria. And when the mitochondria are functioning well, you have upstream effects where other parts of that process also work better. So yeah, it's one of the reasons also that exercise is really, really important for healthy blood sugar levels, So, all right, is this actually making sense to you guys? I hope it is. It's really important to know also that if you're trying to support healthy blood sugar levels, there are a lot of different nutrients out there that you want to look into. A lot of your B vitamins, very, very important for that. Magnesium, very, very important for that. Alpha lipoic acid, which is in apex glutathione, excellent for healthy blood sugar levels. There's a nutrient, a phytochemical called berberine, which occurs in a bunch of different plants, including several Chinese herbs, Indian barberry. All these different herbs contain a phytochemical called berberine, and berberine is incredibly potent when it comes to supporting healthy blood sugar levels. So low carb and keto, if you want to lose some weight and, do that temporarily, that's one way to do it. Is it the healthiest way to do it? Absolutely not. Definitely not. No. And especially if anyone has cardiovascular concerns and you're really worried about cardiovascular health, like, maybe you have certain things running in your family, don't do keto. Just don't. High amounts of fat in your bloodstream are the worst possible thing for your cardiovascular system. So this is also really important. So your cardiovascular system is a hydraulic system, right? And it's a lot more than that, of course. I don't want to oversimplify it and just sound like it's all about being a plumber or something, but your cardiovascular system is, in many respects, it's a hydraulic system, right? So your heart is pumping, right? And then you have all these little veins, arteries, right? Arteries, take it out, the veins put it back into the heart, right? And just think about it, right? When you have, let's say, for example, you made a smoothie and you're trying to suck that smoothie through a straw. Again, also, this is stuff that a lot of this is from the medical media material as well, although there's plenty of other, areas like there's plenty of other researchers, scientists who, will confirm all this too. It's not just from him, but I will say that's a fantastic resource. I have to give credit to Anthony William. But so let's say you made a really thick smoothie and you can't pull that smoothie through the straw. It's too thick. Well, what do? Put the smoothie back in the blender, add more water. Or you can also get a really super wide straw. Those are your two options basically, right? So when you put the smoothie back into the blender and you add more water, you're thinning out the smoothie. Well, guess what happens when you eat a huge amount of fat, when you have a super high fat diet? You're actually putting more fat into the blood, and you can measure this. You can actually have a high fat meal. It's especially true with animal fats. Not that I'm against animal fats, but again, it's all about quantity. How much are you eating and which kind? And that animal fat especially, but fat in general, will go into the blood and cause the blood to become thicker, more viscous. And again, what happens when you have a really thick smoothie, you're trying to pull through a straw, you have to apply a lot of suction, a lot of pressure, in other words, right? So again, to get that smoothie through the straw, if it's too thick, again, just like your blood, too much fat, you have to apply a lot of pressure, right? Which again, raises the blood pressure, right? Of course. So you want to naturally thin your blood, right? Naturally thin your blood by having lower amounts of fat in your diet. Now, of course, your body has ways of compensating for this and getting the fat out of the blood. If your liver is healthy, if your gallbladder is healthy, you're going to do a better job of doing that. Your body's going to do a better job of that, and you're not going to have as many issues. But so many of us have really problematic livers. There's a bunch of different reasons that that we can have liver function that is suboptimal, which is one of the reasons I made Apex Glutathione, because it's kind of the ultimate liver supplement. Again, Apex will be coming out back out in a month and a half, something like that, we're hoping. So make sure you're on the email list so you can get Apex when it comes back out. There'll also be a really awesome deal on it when we do re-release it. But yeah, so just know that there are a lot of reasons why you don't want to do low carb. And low carb is the same as high fat. When you take your carbohydrates down really low, you kind of have to replace them with fat. You can't really eat that much protein to replace them. So typically, and there's really only three sources of calories, right? Carbohydrate, fat, and protein. So when people say low carb, what they actually mean is high fat, right? And again, in the short term, for someone who's relatively healthy, especially for men, that's going to be more tolerable. For anyone who has health issues, who has cardiovascular issues, who has liver issues, and also women because their systems are more sensitive to low carb, it's kind of a nightmare, to be honest. And so some people can get away with a low carb type diet for a little while. Eventually it will catch up with you. I've seen a lot of people go on keto, and I don't know if you guys know anybody. You guys know anybody who's been on keto for a long time, because they'll lose weight at first, they'll start feeling better, And then keep watching them. Their skin will get kind of dry, and it's almost like there's so much fat in their blood that their blood can't properly deliver oxygen and nutrients to their cells anymore. And that's exactly what's happening. It really is. So, but yeah, I've watched some of my friends who I know who are on the whole low carb train, you know, or on the, God forbid, the carnivore train, right? And it's like at first they'll have these different benefits, and then I'll watch them backslide after a year, after 16, 18 months, a couple of years. I'll kind of watch them and I'll just sort of observe them and not really comment, but watch their health. Just watch them get less healthy looking over time. Very, very common. And so again, it's not about being an absolutist, you know. I'm not trying to say that, you know, there's nothing good about keto. Obviously, there's the weight loss part. Sure, there's that. But again, there's way, way healthier ways to lose weight. And regardless of what you're doing, just be aware of all of your other nutrients that are essential for healthy blood sugar levels. Shilajit, very, very important for healthy blood sugar levels. CoQ10, glutathione, magnesium, all of your different B vitamins, especially vitamin B1, really, really important one for that because it helps with glucose, helps with carbohydrate synthesis. Carbohydrate breakdown. Alpha lipoic acid, like I said again, which is in apex glutathione, really, really helpful for that. Phytochemicals like berberine, really important. Amla extract, which we have in Action 2.0, can be helpful for healthy metabolism. All that kind of stuff can be really, really essential. And then, of course, exercise. Exercise has huge effects on metabolism and on healthy blood sugar levels. Very, very important. And then also stress. A lot of people don't know stress hormones will raise your blood sugar. So even something like meditation or psychotherapy for some people, or yoga, or whatever it is that gets your stress hormones down. When you get your stress hormones down, that will also help you with your blood sugar, because these stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, they actually spike your blood sugar. They cause your body to synthesize more glucose from your glycogen stores. In fact, that's one of the reasons that people get hangry. A lot of people don't know, so if you haven't eaten in a while, you've waited too long, you have low blood sugar and you're getting kind of angry or hangry like they call it, somebody asked if I have a blog. Yes, the Chalk blog, chalk.com/blog. Lots of great articles on there. Absolutely. But yeah, when you're getting hangry because you haven't eaten in a while, one of the major things that's happening is your body is actually secreting stress hormones, and those stress hormones will go from your adrenals to your liver and other areas, and they'll actually tell these areas to create fresh glucose from your glycogen stores. And that's a good thing to bring your blood sugar back up, right? Because if it goes too low, that's really, really bad. So your body has all these different mechanisms to bring your blood sugar back up when you're not eating, right? But the problem is that requires extra stress hormones, right? And for somebody who has a pretty good stress hormone tolerance, that might not be a bad thing. They might just be like, fine, no problem. So if you're somebody who can go for long periods without eating and it doesn't make you hangry, then you probably have a good relationship with stress hormones, and you probably don't have adrenal burnout and things like that. But if you're somebody who tends to get hangry when you don't eat, you want to stay as far away from fasting as possible. You want to do the exact opposite of that. So if somebody's got adrenal fatigue, if they've got huge amounts of stress, if they have PTSD especially, which PTSD is, big part of that is a lot of stress hormones, right? You don't want to do fasting. Fasting is the worst thing you could possibly do. It really is. It's going to make that way worse, because that fasting is going to make your stress hormones go higher, and that's going to cause more problems with your nervous system. It's going to burn out your neurotransmitters. It's going to cause more adrenal issues. It's going to fatigue you. It's not a good situation. Because, again, lack of eating, lack of calories coming in, lack of glucose coming in, especially, is going to cause issues with adrenal function, and it's going to basically cause increased amounts of stress hormones. So, in conclusion, don't be afraid of these guys at all. These are medicines. They really are. So It's important to deprogram any of the crappy beliefs about fruit being bad, or what medical meeting calls fruit fear, not a good situation. So definitely if you're talking to somebody and they're saying bananas are bad, you should hang up the phone for sure. That is garbage information. It is not the way. It's not the way to repair your metabolism. It's not the way to have healthy blood sugar levels. You desperately need fruit. You really, really do. Now, if somebody has uncontrolled diabetes, yeah, they have to be careful with all carbs while they're fixing the problem, of course. It's not like somebody, not like anybody can just do whatever they want. There's a way to do this, and you want to work with a professional so you can stage this properly. You can adjust your diet accordingly and get those fat levels down as you're, getting the natural carbohydrates back in, and then using the appropriate supplements and all that sort of thing. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all thing. So don't think that means that everybody, even if somebody has sky-high, blood sugar, that they can just eat as much, fruit as they want. In that moment, they have to do other changes as well, and they need to be with a practitioner so it can be staged properly. And again, like I said, not affiliated, but Mastering Diabetes, really, really cool program. And they do help people. They're medically supervised, and they help people basically get on a more balanced diet that has more naturally occurring plant-based carbohydrates, lower fat diet, to then help to reverse that process. Yeah. All right, let's see. Got any cool comments here? What do we got? All right. Somebody said stop the eggs and milk. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. Yeah. All right. I would love to ask about fruit sugars, as I heard they go directly into your cells without glucose. They go into your cells without glucose? I'm not sure what that means. Why use carbs for energy? Carbohydrates are the single best energy source, in my opinion. Your body is built for carbohydrates, and you'll notice that a lot of these whole food carbohydrates also come with nutrients that are incredibly important for every part of your body, right? Nutrients like minerals and vitamins. And a lot of these minerals and these vitamins, they're often paired with these sources of carbohydrates, are ones you actually need for insulin function. So, for example, things like B vitamins, magnesium, potassium, things like that, trace minerals, chromium. You need all of those, right? So whole food carbohydrates are absolutely the way. But yeah, I will tell you, it's not about, so again, if you're blaming the carbs, you're missing the point. The point is to get the glucose into the cell so it can be converted to energy. That's the point, right? And if your metabolism is working correctly and you're not eating an excessive amount of fat, especially animal fat, and you have all the nutrients you need for your metabolism to work correctly, glucose works extremely well for energy. And it absolutely is the brain's preferred energy source. I don't care what the keto people say about that. Single best thing you can do for yourself for brain function long term is to have plenty of natural carbohydrates in your diet if you want to have really good brain function and focus and memory. Very, very important. And again, for those who were asking about the blog, yeah, I have lots of articles. So does another guy named Jonathan, who's really brilliant. Chalk.com/blog. Yeah. All right. What else we got here? Somebody had a keto rash. That's interesting. Yeah. Also, if you guys want to do keto, don't do huge amounts of eggs and milk. That's the worst possible way to do it. And a friend of mine, his mom was doing keto, and she was eating just like tons of meat and cheese. That's the absolute worst way to do keto. So if you really do want to do keto, don't do it that way. You want to have at least have lots of low carb vegetables in there. Don't eat dairy. Don't eat eggs. Dairy and eggs are a nightmare. They say eggs are the perfect food. They got the DHA, choline, folate, albumin and all that stuff. And sure, yeah, eggs, they do have some good nutrients in them, but they are a huge problem when it comes to hormones and when it comes to inflammation. You're feeding chronic inflammation, you're dysregulating your hormones if you're eating eggs. Doesn't matter how natural they are. If they're from your backyard, you do not want to eat huge amounts of eggs. That is a horrible, horrible idea for your health. Trust me, that is a big one. Yeah. So eggs and dairy, very, very problematic. And so a lot of the people I think who are doing keto, who are having problems, some of those problems are coming from the huge amounts of cheese and eggs, things like that, Yeah. And obviously eating excessive amounts of meat too. Yeah. All right, let's see what else we got here. Any other interesting, what are the benefits of Tomcat 100? Oh yeah, well, Julian, I don't know if you're still here or not, but Tomcat is fantastic for healthy hormone support, as well as for stress hormones, cortisol, things like that. It's an adaptogen, so it helps with energy levels, focus. It helps also with healthy metabolism and immune support. Yep. All right. Definitely felt better after adding healthy carbs back in. Yes, very, very important. And again, I will say, some people will tolerate keto better than others, but even though for those who tolerate it well, there will be a crashing point at some point. It could take years. Yeah, but yeah. All right. Intermittent fasting is key. There are huge contraindications for intermittent fasting. A lot of people don't know this. It's very important to know. Intermittent fasting is a total nightmare for certain people, and these people are fairly common. If you're somebody who has a lot of stress in your life, PTSD, and high stress hormones, if you're somebody who has adrenal burnout, somebody who has a lot of autoimmune disease, things like that, you might want to be really careful with intermittent fasting because lack of eating for long periods of time has a tendency to drive up stress hormones. So what's actually good is to do the exact opposite of that, which is the grazing technique where you're eating small amounts of healthy snacks, like an apple and a little bit of almond butter or something like that throughout the day. Just small amounts throughout the day to make sure you have a constant flow of calories coming in. And that's actually, again, it's the total opposite of intermittent fasting, but can be extremely helpful. Yeah. All right. Let's see here. Okay. What else we got? Great topic. Yeah, thanks, Phyllis. Glad you're digging it. Very cool. All right. Somebody says, I did keto from May to August last year. I had labs drawn. My A1C was up 5.9 from 4.3, and my lipids were up to, and both were previously normal. Yep. Yeah, you'd be surprised. Also, a lot of people they think they're actually in ketosis and they're not. That can certainly happen. There's also talks about, there being more sugar in meat than we think as well, because the blood itself can still have glucose in it, and maybe that's not being measured correctly. So our idea that meat is low carb may actually be less true than we thought. Yeah. All right. Okay, what else we got? What are healthy carbs? Simply put, anything that comes directly out of the ground is a fairly healthy carb. So, stuff like this, right? Yeah. And that's not to say that, I have grape juice in here. Not to say you can't eat fruit juice. A lot of people are saying, fruit juice is bad, spikes your glucose too much. Well, if you have a proper glucose tolerance and you're eating a low to moderate fat diet, yeah, no, you're fine. Nothing wrong with juice. It's all good. Because again, your body's going to clear that, right? So it's not about demonizing the carbs. And even if you eat the bad carbs are still not the worst thing in the world. You shouldn't go anywhere near them. They shouldn't be a regular part of your diet. But if you're going to have a little tiny bit of sugar in some chocolate you eat, it's really not that big of a deal. One of the other problems is, last thing I'll say before I head out, food combining is also very important. So if I'm going to have a high-fat meal, right? So if you're going to make a high-fat meal, right? So like if you're going to have a steak or something like that, if you eat meat, or if you're going to have, if you don't eat meat, and you're going to eat like something with a whole bunch of like nuts in it or with a lot of oil in it, if you're vegan, you don't want to have a whole lot of high-carb stuff with that, because the fat in that meal is going to block your cell's ability to use those carbs, right? And that's, again, to go back to that example of the rats and the mice and how they have figured out a predictable way to give them diabetes. They add the high carb and the high fat together, and that's the perfect 1-2 punch to make sure that they can induce diabetes. It's that combination of the high carb, high fat. So, for example, if someone's making a steak, you never want to eat potato with that. You want to actually eat like some low carb vegetables like broccoli and kale and things like that, right? And if you're making a baked potato for yourself, you don't want to put a whole bunch of like sour cream or butter or or any kind of oil, even if it's coconut oil. You don't want to use huge amounts of oil with that potato, because high fat, high carb, they do not get along. So you want to pick one or the other. Yeah, very, very important there. And now think also about desserts. Most people when they see a donut, they'll be like, oh, that donut's bad because it's got too much sugar. Well, it's not just the sugar in that donut. It's also the huge amount of fat. The fact that you've combined all of these bad carbs with these bad fats together, that's a recipe for disaster. So think about all of your fun sweet foods, right? They're going to be, for example, like, your brownies and your cupcakes and your cookies and all that kind of stuff. They tend to be high in refined carbohydrates and also high in fats, and oftentimes some of the worst fats, right? They are basically designed to spike your blood sugar. So, I have a client who actually installed a continuous glucose monitor. He doesn't actually even have issues. He just is an interesting kind of self-scientist biohacker, whatever kind of guy. Not that I like the term biohacking. I'm sure you guys know I don't. I wrote that article that I talked about recently. But he's, that's his deal, right? So, and it was really interesting. He said, what you're telling me I know is true now, because the other day in the morning I ate a whole bunch of fruit and my blood sugar didn't spike. It was a huge amount of carbohydrates, all fruit, big fruit smoothie, no spike in blood sugar because his cells cleared it out of the blood right away. Then he said, I went and had some barbecue at some point. So he ate a bunch of pork ribs, right? And then he had carbs with it. Obviously you have sugar in the barbecue sauce. And then I think he might have had a dessert. He might have had potato. So he had a bunch of carbs with a really, really heavy animal fat like pork. Guess what happened? Blood sugar spiked like crazy. The fat from the ribs forced his blood sugar to spike. It impaired his cell's ability to take that glucose up. So again, it's the high fat, especially the saturated fat from animals is the worst, that will spike the glucose. So lastly, just saying one last time, if you know anybody who is under this spell, this false belief that it's all about the carbs and it's all the carbs' fault and they're carb phobic and they're fruit phobic, show them this video, tell them to do their own research for sure, or go back and watch this video, figure out some of the things I'm talking about, and yeah, do your best to set them straight, because that's just scientifically just wrong, that belief. It's not as simple as how many carbs you're taking in. So demonizing carbs is not the answer, will never be the answer. It's completely scientifically just wrong. And it's really important to know that you want to keep your fat intake moderate or lower, and you want to be extra careful with animal fats. You want to take those down. Not that you can't eat them if you like to eat them. Not trying to convert everyone to veganism, but I'm just saying if you do eat animal fat, take that down. Eat no more than one serving a day. That's a good maximum. Try to eat animal proteins that are going to be a little bit easier on your system, like fish, for example, and that will help you dramatically. All right, so get a little winded here. I think that's about it for today. This is a lot of fun, and I will see you guys soon. Until then, stay human. Thanks for watching.